So if you've never heard of the political compass, I want to show you this. It's a neat little tool. About the political compass. In the introduction, they explain the inadequacies of the traditional left-right line. If we recognize that this is essentially an economic line, it's fine as far as it goes. We can show, for example, Stalin, Mao, and Pol Pot with their commitment to a totally controlled economy on the hard left. Socialists like Mahatma Gandhi and Robert Mugabe would occupy a less extreme leftist position. Margaret Thatcher would be well over to the right, but further right still would be someone like that ultimate free marketeer, General Pinochet. That deals with economics, but there is a social dimension also. That's the one that the mere left-right scale doesn't adequately address. So we've added one ranging in positions from extreme authoritarian to extreme libertarian. So you can see here, authoritarian left, authoritarian right, libertarian left, and libertarian right. Both an economic and social dimension are important factors for a proper political analysis. By adding the social dimension, you can show that Stalin was an authoritarian leftist, i.e. the state is more important than the individual, and that Gandhi, believing in the supreme value of each individual, is a liberal leftist. While the former involves state-imposed arbitrary collectivism in the extreme top left, on the extreme bottom left is a voluntary collectivism at a regional level, with no state involved. Hundreds of such anarchist communities existed in Spain during the Civil War period. You can also put Pinochet, who was prepared to sanction mass killing for the sake of the free market, on the far right, as well as in a hardcore authoritarian position. On the non-socialist side, you can distinguish someone like Milton Friedman, who is anti-state for fiscal rather than social reasons, from Hitler, who wanted to make the state stronger, even if he wiped out half of humanity in the process. This chart also makes it clear that despite popular perceptions, the opposite of fascism is not communism, but anarchism, and that the opposite of communism is neoliberalism, an extreme, deregulated economy. And so you could see they just put some well-known leaders here. You've got Margaret Thatcher, and then for whatever reason, Mr. Mustache here is on the right wing of economics. Not sure why a National Socialist wouldn't be maybe over here, but as we go through this, you'll see the people that made this kind of have a leftist slant to their view on the world, and it comes through in things like this. You have Stalin here on the hard left, and I think if you had the prime evils, the three prime evils of the 20th century all in this quadrant, it might make any leftists justifiably as squeamish as they should be. Down here in the libertarian collectivist left, you have a racist pedophile. If you don't know the story of Gandhi, the true story of Gandhi, you have some fun reading ahead of you. And over here on the anarchist right, you have Friedman. So the usual understanding of anarchism as a left-wing ideology does not take into account the neoliberal anarchism championed by the likes of Ayn Rand, Milton Friedman, and America's Libertarian Party, which couples social Darwinian right-wing economics with liberal positions on most social issues. Often their libertarian impulses stop short of opposition to strong law and order positions and are more economic in substance, i.e. no taxes. So they are not as extremely libertarian as they are extremely right-wing. On the other hand, the classical libertarian collectivism of anarcho-syndicalism, libertarian socialism, belongs in the bottom left-hand corner. So, in our homepage, they claim we demolish the myth that authoritarianism is necessarily right-wing, with examples of Robert Mugabe, Pol Pot, and Stalin. Similarly, Hitler on an economic scale was not an extreme right-winger. Obviously, he was a socialist. His economic policies were broadly Keynesian and to the left of some of today's labor parties. If you could get Hitler and Stalin to sit down together and avoid economics, the two die-hard authoritarians would find plenty of common ground. A word about neocons and neolibs. So this is the United States. U.S. neoconservatives, with their commitment to high military spending and global assertion of national values, tend to be more authoritarian than hard right. By contrast, neoliberals, opposed to such moral leadership, and more especially the ensuing demands on the taxpayer, belong to a further right but less authoritarian region. Paradoxically, the free market, in neocon parlance, allows for the large-scale subsidy of the military-industrial complex, a considerable degree of corporate welfare and protectionism when deemed in the national interest. These are viewed by the neolibs as impediments to the unfettered market forces that they champion. And so we're going to take this test, and we're going to see where I fall, and then we're going to see where we fall in terms of historical personalities. And then, of course, because history is boring and nobody cares about it, we're going to take some fictional histories, and we're going to put different Dark Lords from fantasy stories that I think fit these quadrants well, and maybe make this a little bit more fun. So here's the test. I'm not going to pick apart every question. I'm just going to kind of burn through it real quick. But I do want to start. You can see their leftward bent here. If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. I mean, just claiming that globalization is inevitable, to me, is almost like saying if faster than light travel or getting conquered by aliens is inevitable, we should, this is an insane thing to me to assume, but sure, it should serve people. I'd always support my country, whether it was right or wrong. No one chooses his or her country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. I would disagree with that. Our race has many superior qualities compared with other races. This is another very loaded question. I don't know what that means. The human race? I mean, sure. Why not? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. There is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. Well, that would be this video right here, so no. Next we go to the economy. People are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. Couldn't disagree with that more. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. That's tough. If we were on a gold standard, we'd be better off, but we're not. So, because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. So who regulates? That would be big government, and who trusts them? Here we have the Marxist: from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, is a fundamentally good idea. Well, how do you get there? Well, you point a gun at the guy that just worked 14 hours of overtime and take his pay and give it to the guy laying on the couch. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. I can think of a lot of things that are sad reflections on our society, and water in a bottle is not one of them. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. That's private property. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing. Well, they do. I don't know what manipulate money is. People giving loans, people making markets. Finance, money management does contribute. So, anyway, protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade, absolutely. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. I don't know what else you can hold a company accountable for. The rich are too highly taxed. Everybody's too highly taxed. Those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. I mean, let's face it, that's just reality. Government should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Who decides? Judges with a political axe to grind. This just makes the powerful and unaccountable more powerful. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. That's kind of a weird one, but YouTube has a problem right now. The freer the market, the freer the people. Abortion when a woman's life is not threatened should always be illegal. All authorities should be questioned. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Who's going to enforce this? Right? Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. All people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. This is such a bizarre question. It is better for all of us. So is that communalism? That different sorts of people, what does that mean? There should be voluntary association, I guess. That's what I would say. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. I'm agnostic on this, but I think discipline is part of parenting. It's natural for children to keep secrets from their parents. That's just bizarre. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. Strongly disagree. Who decides? Who decides what's serious? Who decides, who enforces this? The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. Where do we go here? There are no savage and civilized people. There are only different cultures. Yeah, go try to bicycle through Taliban country and tell me that. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. A day without working is a day without eating. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. It's kind of a female thing. First-generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. If I immigrate to Iran, I will never be a fully integrated Iranian citizen at this point in life. What's good for the most successful corporation is always ultimately good for all of us. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. No public funding. Civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. No. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. We do have rights, somewhat. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. No, because that puts the power of life and death in the hands of the state. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. Well, let's look at chiefs and Indians. You want one chief, and that's just kind of how it is. But they make it sound so awful. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. I just don't care. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. It is a waste of time to try and rehabilitate some criminals, I suppose. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. Where are the writer and artist going to go to the bathroom? They need a functioning waste disposal system, and that otherwise it's just gross. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. Yeah, I think it's important to take care of your kids rather than file paperwork. Multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. I don't know what that is getting at. Okay, religion. Astrology explains many things. You cannot be moral without being religious. Charity is better than Social Security as a means of helping the disadvantaged. Worked for a very long time. Some people are naturally unlucky. Look at, yes. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. No, I don't think that's the role of the state. Sex outside of marriage, what do you even do with this question? Sure, just to be difficult. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of adoption. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal. It's cat's out of the bag. What goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. Couldn't agree more. No one can feel naturally homosexual. Well, the sewer is not a good place for a date. These days, openness about sex has gone too far. Yeah, I'm tired of hearing about people's lives. Let's see where we stand. Okay. Okay, we looked at this in the beginning. And so you can go down to your certificate and go to the certificate page, put in our name, and it will get printable. Show us where we stand here. Okay, so we are down here. We're in the sort of right libertarian quadrant. And this is, you can see the historical breakdowns here. You have the hard left authoritarians. You have Stalin, Mao, Fidel Castro, Robert Mugabe. Here is the authoritarian right. And here you can see their bias coming out. Here's Mr. Trump. We'll remember who else was in this spot. And you have Hillary Clinton is actually more right-wing than Donald Trump. I mean, even in the most fevered leftist Trump derangement syndrome, I have not heard anyone suggest Hillary Clinton is more far-right than Donald Trump. So I think Trump and Hillary should be switched. But like I said, not perfect, but this is a fun tool. Pinochet, Mussolini, Theresa May. We have Winston Churchill, Angela Merkel, Thomas Hobbes. Down here, near me, you can see, I'm like Gary Johnson or Ludwig von Mises. Milton Friedman, Hayek, and then way down here you have Ayn Rand. And then in the psycho category, you have Gandhi, Corbyn. You have Jill Stein, Nelson Mandela. There's Bernie Sanders, Thomas Paine, Noam Chomsky. And so you can see heavy rain inhabits the right libertarian quadrant of the political compass. So what I want to do now is let's take some fictional characters and see where they would fall. So I think for the first, the upper left quadrant here, absolute economic control and absolute authoritarianism, the choice here is pretty obvious, and that would be Sauron from The Lord of the Rings. You have the bringer of gifts promising free college and medical care, and then it turns out these gifts come with a heavy price till you're just reduced to a shrieking fool in the streets. And you can see, one ring to rule them all. It would be the absolute concentration of power in the hands of one man. And you can also see this theme of absolute power corrupts absolutely. No matter the good intentions, when you have that much power concentrated in one spot, anyone, even a person with good intentions, would eventually be corrupted and misuse it. And so the only option is to destroy it. So Tolkien seemed to have a very deep understanding of how evil was manifesting itself in the 20th century with regard to leaders like Mao or Stalin. So in the quadrant of the authoritarian right, I think that Emperor Palpatine from the Star Wars series represents a good model of the corruption of a republic. The Emperor took full command of the military from what had been a republic form of government. And I don't know if this is ever explicitly stated in canon, but it would seem as if, since it had formerly been a republic, you would at least have vestiges of the free market. You would still have businesses, corporations, and companies that were allowed to basically function as they had under a republic, but then you have the authoritarian full command of the military in the hands of one man, leading to perpetual war. The next one will seem a little obscure if you weren't a child from the 80s, but bear with me and I'll explain it. I would say this libertarian quadrant is chaos from the original Final Fantasy series. In this world, you had an advanced society with things like flying ships, robots, and even a floating castle. And when chaos struck, he first struck at the center of government power, destroying this floating castle. He next struck at the religious center, sinking a sea shrine into the ocean. Next, he destroyed the mercantile and centers of trade with a volcano, which poisoned and destroyed all of the river waterways and tradeways. And lastly, he corrupted the farmland and destroyed any large-scale farming. And what resulted was not the anarcho-capitalist utopia, but instead the people were reduced to basically a medieval subsistence survival-based economy built upon the ruins of this advanced civilization. And your characters in the game have to go around restoring order to the world. For our last quadrant, I think we have the one that I believe makes the least sense. It's the most infantile and narcissistic of the bunch. And so I selected Lord Voldemort from the Harry Potter series to fill this block. He's the Dark Lord that seems to make the least sense. He doesn't necessarily want to set up and rule his own order. It's all just basically emotional. And the fact that he's powerful and he's cruel and he's evil, and so he wants to do cruel and evil things and tear everything down. You kind of see this thought or attitude of a lot of punk bands or far-left agitators. It's like you have this hippie commune chugging along, and then all of a sudden, Charles Manson moves in, and all hell breaks out. And I think if you were to put this in the alignment system of D&D, this would be the chaotic evil character. Chaotic evil characters tend to have no respect for rules, other people's lives, or anything but their own desires, which are typically selfish and cruel. They set a high value on personal freedom, but do not have much regard for the lives or freedom of other people. So there you have it. No matter what your political beliefs are, you're a horrible, no-good person. I'd encourage you to take this political compass test. Let me know where you landed. Did you land where you expected to land, or did you land somewhere else? And which Dark Lord are you? And what do you think about my selection of Dark Lords? Do they fit well, or is there someone else that should have been used instead? And most importantly, did this help you to think about politics in a different way?